2020, a year in headlines. Kanye's album to turn 10, a year of dark, twisted fantasies. Trump's impeachment trial begins, the court of jesters jostle the throne. Harry and Meghan step back as royals, two young monarchs throw their crowns. Qasem Soleimani killed in drone strikes, dust and fire rises in the east. Australian bushfires kill 1 billion animals. Dust and fire rises in the south. Luxembourg makes transport free. The right to roam is further eased. Landslide strands 500 people. Solid ground begins to shift. Coronavirus officially named, the shrewd beast will try to tame. East Anglian festivals cancelled, canaries fall at the mouth of the cave. Egypt's oldest pyramid opens, old stone gullet welcomes prey. Tesco rations beans and pasta, rivers of food trickle to streams. Elon Musk sends unmanned spaceship, the rich, their drones fly out to flee. Captain Tom raises 23 million. The retired returns to frontline battle. April, hottest one on record. Days burn brighter than before. Trump says inject disinfectant. The jester plays loose with lives. Boris Johnson in intensive care. The jester's life lay loose. Reuters wins Pulitzer Prize. Newscasters crown themselves. Their eyes, Dominic Cummings won't resign. Cold cult king clings to saddle. Ahmaud Arbery, short whilst jogging. A white spectre snares a black life. George Floyd killed by police. Another thoughtless grew to matter. Edward Colston's statue drowned. Thoughtless matter loses ground. Hong Kong passes security law. Walls rise up. A giant falls. Locusts swarm New Delhi. Ancient plague returns anew. Zoos and safari parks reopen. The communion of animals continues. Café Rouge enters administration. A red restaurant writhes in the red. NASA's rover flies to Mars. Machines will tread on the red planet. John Lewis, civil rights leader, dies. King's horseman leaves the battle. Oscars hit diversity target. The pool widens on who decides. Huge explosion rocks Beirut. The lips of Lebanon lick with flames. 80 million people sick. The beast we failed to tame feasts on. Greta Thunberg returns to school. Nature's child seeks other lessons. Chadwick Boseman dies of cancer. The Black Panther joins his ancestors. COVID sniffer dogs used in Helsinki. Canines seek the untamed beast. 100 West Coast fires burn. Dust and fire rises in the west. Ruth Bader Ginsburg dies. The notorious RBG reclines. NASA to land first woman on the moon. The notorious RBG smiles. Marcus Rashford calls for food. The forward fights to feed the young. Businesses offer free school meals. Fat cats thin their private stores. Belgium appoints first trans minister. A liminal voice is amplified. Boris shares new lockdown rules. The beast brings the Britons blues. Sean Connery, Bond star, dies. The first license to kill expires. Diego Maradona dies. The hand of God plucks the striker. Joe Biden wins US election. Blue bishop takes red knight. Most expensive face mask made, thick with stones, craving air. Metal monolith appears on mountain. Mystery manifests among the clouds. Musicians ask to tour differently. Lighter footprints, cleaner sounds. Football fans return to stadiums. Chants fill the timeless aisles. Who will get the vaccine first? the theme tune of our lives. Hello?
Hello?
Hi. Can you hear
Hello.
me?
Hello.
Yes, we can hear. I can hear
Hi.
you.
Okay, awesome. I can't see you.
I can't see you guys either.
I can hear you all. Hey, there's Antonio.
Okay,
There
there
we
we
go.
go. Hi.
Hello,
There we go.
everybody.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us today for the launch of this new commissioned poem and a chat with Inua. I'm Antonia, a member of the Lit from the Inside group at the National Centre for Writing, who helped set up this event.
And I'm Ruben, also from Lip from the Inside.
And I'm Inua. I'm
And
a
we
writer.
hope you managed. Oh. We hoped you managed to chat the poem, to catch the poem. If you haven't read it yet, you can go to nationalcentreforwriting.org.uk/Chrysalis. This event is part of the wider Chrysalis Festival, programmed by Lit from the Inside at the National Centre for Writing. The first event this morning was a panel conversation about reading diversely. If you didn't manage to catch that, you can go back and watch it on this YouTube channel after this event. Thank you for joining.
Hello, Inua. Would you please be able to tell the audience a little bit about yourself, just so we know a bit of background?
Yes, my name is Inua. I'm a writer of poetry and plays, poems primarily, but a lot of plays, and I've slipped into writing TV and feature films. I was born in Nigeria in 1984. I live in London. I lived in Dublin for 3 years, and I'm currently sitting in a park.
Sounds lovely. Before we talk about this specific poem, I wanted to ask you how you found this past year, particularly in relation to your writing. So, did you find yourself kind of more or less being able to focus on your writing in this kind of difficult time?
Um, at the start of the pandemic, at the start of lockdown, like most people, it was difficult to focus on anything besides the news, and creativity kind of crashed. I couldn't do anything, and I tried to write about the pandemic, and that didn't work. So when I finally could create things, I was working on plays that were set in the past, as far back as pre-colonial Nigeria, like 1890s forward. And then I began to think a little bit about a future, and I was able to then write and create. But now this time round was really, really difficult. I'm not really able to produce as I normally can. So it's changed. There were times where I was really productive and times where there was just nothing happening. All I could do was binge watch The Sopranos.
A lot during lockdown, and I know that other people have been sort of struggling to read, but would you have any advice for aspiring kind of writers during this time?
Um, the first, I'd say the most important thing is not to pressure yourself. Um, and maybe this is a good time for incubation, for you to just think about ideas, bash ideas together, see what comes forth. But um, what we're experiencing now as a species on Earth is completely unprecedented. It's happened before, but not to this scale. I mean, and not in this incredibly financially stringent and obtuse times. What I'm trying to say is be human first, be in the present moment, and see to your most important needs, and then let creativity or the attempt to be creative come secondary to that. And if it doesn't come, don't stress yourself. I remember at the height of lockdown, there were these Fortune 500 businessmen saying something like, if you come out of lockdown and you haven't written a novel or you haven't learned X amount of skills, then you've wasted your life. I believe the complete opposite. I think Earth was trying to tell us as a species just to chill, to slow down, and I think you should focus on that. And if in the midst of that something comes forth, then go forth and write it down and see. But don't pressure yourself. Just be in the present, read, research, relax, and wait for the sparks to come if they want to come.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very good
Great,
advice.
thank you. So to give a bit of background on this discussion, we asked you to write a poem reflecting on 2020. You then asked us to compile a list of headlines from the year for you to take inspiration from. What was your sort of creative process behind this, and why did you choose these particular headlines out of our list?
I think initially, if I wanted to write a poem of my own creation, of my own imagination, and of my own concerns, it will reflect much of my reality and much of my concerns exclusively. And I say that because as broad-minded and as broadly thinking and as inquisitive and curious I am about the world and beyond, and being an immigrant, my world is large. I knew that algorithms obscured me and into creating contexts and texts and poems that are essentially echo chambers. So because I was aware of that, I didn't want to just choose headlines. I wanted to see what those I was collaborating with, i.e., you guys, would be at the forefront of your minds. So asking you guys to give me the headlines sort of made a collaborative process and made me read other things that just didn't cross my desks over the course of last year. So that was what I found. I knew nothing about transport in Luxembourg. I knew nothing about Greta Thunberg going back to school. So I think I was able to see the world through your eyes, through your lenses, and that broadened my horizons. When it came to writing the poem, my antennas were beyond me. And then it became about a filtration process, really, about trying to see what dots I could connect within your headlines and create ways that it could echo and sort of reflect and mirror each other. And once I figured out that that could work within the span of headlines you gave me, I tried to choose the ones that I think um, I guess captured the sense of chaos, but also the sense of peace and joy that were lost to us in the mulch of the news, and that's kind of seeped to the surface. And also, I was trying to be playful with the language, despite how difficult the topics were, to try and bring some light and some transformation in how you discuss the headlines and the news stories. So for me, it was pleasing. There was something meditative about it, about seeing the headlines, trying to reduce the headlines, and trying to reinterpret them into something else. There were lots of walks, lots of thinking, and I enjoyed the process. I think if I just sat down to write the poem, it would have taken much longer. And I've spent quite a lot of depressive hours looking over the headlines, and I didn't want to do that to myself. So working with you guys was liberating and educational for me.
Thank
Great,
you very
thank
much.
you.
So once you decided on your headlines that you were going to use, how long did it take you to get from your decisions to the amazing piece that you shared with us this morning?
I think I worked incessantly on it for about a week, and just reducing and fine tuning and rejigging things over and over again. Then making sure that the headlines and the stories happen in the months that they happen, as opposed to a few days later, or sometimes some stories happen on the cusp of a month. So I need just to fine tune those things. So there was additional research needed, and then a reduction of those headlines into images and into metaphor. So I think it took roughly about a week um, of reading and rereading and researching to arrive at that. Yeah.
Thank you.
So last year was dominated by huge worldwide events that impacted on the individual. I think your poem really captures that juxtaposition between the wider world and also everyone's individual personal experiences. Um, is this like a theme that you're interested in more broadly?
I think so. I think it really governs the ways in which I create drama. I think about even the statement, "I'm not interested in politics. I'm not a political person," is a political statement because it suggests a decision made to remove yourself, to stand out from a certain crowd. Um, and I think when I consider politics, I always bring it straight down to the individual to understand the reasons why someone might vote Labour or might vote Conservative or might vote Republican and might vote Democrat, and it's incredibly nuanced. Sometimes you find yourself um, s- um, choosing to vote because of tradition as opposed to political or social political belief, or sometimes just because of geography, because of the place you live, everyone votes conservative. So so I think understanding that as a playwright and understanding the need for nuance in trying to create drama in the space for poem always means that I bring things straight down to the individual. I think the job of writers is always to deepen situations, to deepen conversations, and that is what I was trying to do.
Thank you. Great answer.
We were talking in our group about the way you play with rhyme in this poem, and there are a number of moments when sort of rhyme, like for example, you describe COVID as a hidden beast, I think it was, or a sly beast. What's your thought process behind like coming up with lines like that?
Um, Rhyme is really interesting for me. When I first came to writing poetry, I studied the classics. I studied sonnets, which where rhymes are used almost as bolts to end sentences. They end rhymes. They're very sturdy, fastened things, and it makes the listeners and the readers know where they are in the line in the poem, and the ear begins to listen for it. But at the same time that I was reading classic poetry and poets from the canon, my friends in Ireland introduced me to hip hop. And what I loved about hip hop was internal rhyme and how hip hop artists were able to make um, time vanish. And I say time because rhymes stake time. They are markers within the continuum. But rappers, by using internal rhyme, were able to slow it down or speed it up and to create more context and more drama within the same stretch of time. And that is how I use rhyme, not just sometimes they do occur at the end of a thought, but sometimes in the middle to create and critique and to deepen and also to create internal I guess emotional attachments to things and I think it just makes poems more playful and mellifluous to the ear. And I always try to do that to my audiences, for there to be various other things happening, just not just the imagery, not just the metaphor, not just the meaning, but also the sound of everything. For me, that is as important a tool in creating poetry as any of the other things. I know some poets who don't rhyme. I love poetry that doesn't rhyme, but because I'm a child of the hip hop generation, I sort of, fell in love with what those sonic poets were doing at the same time as the page poets. I try to represent both traditions and both cultures in their work, regardless of how difficult or stringent or playful or a topic, regardless of who my audiences are. I try to consistently play with musicality in my work.
Oh, thank
Awesome,
you for
thank you.
that. So this is quite a reflective poem, and I was wondering how you found the process of looking back at 2020. And this is a question from Amelia. So did the process of writing make you see 2020 in a different light?
Um, it made me understand some of the stories that I had missed and understand other ways in which um, our government has colossally messed things up. But also to put it um, against the scale of devastation in terms of climate change, and also to be more aware of the speed of information and the travel of devastation and the reporting of devastation. And by that I mean I remember the start of last year when Donald Trump set off the drone strike in Iraq, and how terrified we were that we were at the cusp of World War III. Then I was in Pakistan working when the forest fires were eating up huge swathes of Australia. And I remember thinking, oh my God, there's already too much happening. Suddenly the pandemic came, and all of that I completely forgot about it. So it provided space to reflect on last year, to try to consider what was happening to me personally when all of these things were happening, but also the the responses from all of those places in the world. I have friends who live in Australia, who lives in Pakistan, who lives in Colombia, and when I was writing the poem, part of my thought process was to try and figure out how they were experiencing the same periods of times that we were experiencing here. And it was really humbling to understand how other governments had treated and communicated news of the pandemic to their populations, to their people, and how our government had colossally failed um, to present a clear narrative. Um, and the headlines reflected that because they show what we were afraid of, and what we were blindsided with. So all of this writing the poem afforded me time to think over, to reflect on, and consider.
Yeah.
I think it did a really good
Oh,
job for
thank
all
you.
of us at that. I loved reading it
Yeah.
through. You remember things that you forgot about.
Yeah. This commission asked you to look back on the year, but what are your sort of plans heading forward into a post-COVID world?
Um, I think first and foremost, I don't know what a post-COVID world looks like, which means that I have to also try and stay in the present and try and not expect too much, and try and give the creators that I work with space to go through what it is they're going through, and try and demand the same space for myself. I don't know what a post-COVID world looks like. We can sort of guess if we look at other countries that have suffered from coronaviruses, South Korea, Japan, China, and try and understand what normal now looks like to them. I think each year, the population, I think in South Korea, they take vaccinations for SARS or for MERS, and it's just like taking a flu vaccination at the start of the year. So now that becomes standard practice here in the UK. I think wearing masks will become um, as normal as wearing a pair of socks. So that will be interesting. It will be interesting to think about what that now means for CCTV cameras. If people necessarily have to cover their faces, and I wonder that would mean if you're a person of African descent, a person of color, given um, the racism that exists within the police force. All of those things I haven't quite figured out yet, but I'm slowly and just coming to terms with that, and trying to be aware of it, and to think about how I can address that in the work that I create, and to safeguard members of my community, and not just as an African, but as a Londoner, as an urbanite, etc. But I don't know just yet. All of those things will unfold as they will, and I think first and foremost, I'm just trying to stay present. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's a really interesting point that I think a lot of us hadn't thought about. Um, I have a question from Claudia. Can a poem so full of contemporary references stand the test of time? So a sort of poetic record, lest we forget.
Um, I don't know. I think poems should be viewed as pictures. That what isn't contained in the poem is as important as what is in the poem, and it should be contextualized. So maybe 5 or 10 years from now, um, it can be looked at as a historical document rather than a timeless piece, and I think I'll be happy with that. But also, if other writers look back and think Inua got it colossally wrong, I think I'll also be happy with that, because it does show where literature was, where I was at the time, and lessons that I failed to learn, and it will be part of a teaching tool into towards understanding how to deal with other pandemics, how to write them down, how to immortalize them in the ways that poetry can, the poetry attempts to. Um, yeah, I don't know. I never really think about trying to create timeless work. Um, I hope that my work is timeless, but to each new age comes a new language, and words fall out of usage. They fall out of meanings. Their meanings are colonized by other words, and I expect that to happen to poems and to everything that is written. So if that happens, then my poem is just in the continuum of the evolution of language, and that's fine. Writing poetry is one of the most ridiculous and pathetic things. It requires so much um, egotistical bravado to string words together and say, "Behold, I've created art." It's a wild and ridiculous thing to do. Yet when you're in the grip of writing a poem, it feels like the most important thing to do and the only thing worth doing. But as soon as you finish, you're released from the vice of inspiration, and it has another life. And if it chooses to die, it chooses to die. There's nothing you can do about it. It's on its own journey.
Cool. Thank you. We have a question from our audience this time, from a 39 Kiris. They ask, I've recently found my voice through writing and found that writing things down was a way of making sense of things. Is this something that you find when you write?
Absolutely. Poetry and writing in general, first and foremost for me, is catharsis. Is a way to pin down my thoughts, to try and understand who I am, why I am, why I care about the things that I care about. It's a thought process. It's meditation. It's relief. It's all of those things. So yeah, it definitely is that for me. Um, and I hate arguing because I'm not good at coming up with like witty snapbacks or winning things in the moment. I'm a writer. I like to just write things down firstly, which means that you don't want me to debate with you, to be a debating team. I'll be terrible at it. But writing gives me space and control. Yeah.
Thank you.
I thank you. I think a lot of people find that as well. I find it easier to write things down. That's why I love English so much. But so just
Yeah.
before this, we had a panel event on reading diversely. So analyzing our own bookshelves and the wider industry, talking about whose stories are being told as well as how they are being told. Do you have any recommendations for the ways that we can broaden our reading, especially in regards to poetry?
Um, I do this thing when I find poets that I like, where I search for them on Amazon. And I try not to buy books from Amazon for obvious reasons. Not much comes back to the publishers or to the poets or to the writers. But what Amazon does is that it suggests other people whose work were purchased a long time, and it creates a sort of similarities of writers. So I think if you go into Amazon and look for my work, it will recommend work by poets like Haya Chingonyi, Jay Bernard, Malika Booker, Watasan Shire, and all of these aren't just friends of mine, but they're poets whose work that I cherish or have inspired me. And what I try to do then is to create a family of poets or writers. So if you buy Warsan's book, for instance, and then it suggests other poets of Somali origin or of immigrant origin or of Muslim or Egyptian or Middle Eastern, etc. So you begin to sort of branch out and create a family tree. So I try to use the algorithms to my advantage, and by doing so, I'm always constantly discovering new poets and creating new families of work, and it just replenishes me. And I think I'd recommend, yeah, you guys to do so, other readers, just to see who else are in the family of poets you like or poems that you like, and begin to read out that way.
Yeah, thank
Great,
you.
thank
That
you.
was very insightful. Yeah. Would you say that being a poet and like a playwright and everything has given you a unique sort of insight onto the world? Like, do you look at the world differently to someone who, say, like, wasn't a poet?
Yeah, definitely. It's brought certain understandings and privileges to my world, which I only discovered after maybe 10 years of being a writer. I'll give an example. So I never went to university like my sisters did. I just started off writing poetry, and I existed almost exclusively in poetry circles, which meant that when I'd read a poem before an audience, they'd applaud, they'd clap for me. And I discovered that the more personal and the more emotional poems I created and shared, the louder those applauses got, and the more I was booked or commissioned to create work for various, magazines, anthologies, events, blah 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 blah. Which meant that I was applauded for being emotionally intelligent and connected to my feelings. And lots of men just don't exist in those spaces. Lots of black men specifically. We're not applauded for being emotional. Right from an early age, we're told to not, not to cry like a girl. We'd be demeaned and insulted for being emotionally alive. And that happens when right from an early age. So when I turned about 30, I became really aware that I had spent almost 10 years being applauded for being emotionally rich and resonant, and men weren't doing that. So when I work with men, when I work with other writers, actors, even just how I interact with guys that I play basketball with, and the language on the court is full of braggadocio. To understand where they're coming from, why they speak that way, and sometimes I find ways to undermine it so they are more emotionally respectful on the court, or I just even do things to make them feel a little bit uncomfortable. Like I went through a period of going out of my way to compliment men on their clothing, just to tell them that I saw that they had spent some time thinking purely aesthetically about their looks, and it's okay for men to do so. So I tried to actively undermine hypermasculinity, and all of it came from just existing in spaces where that was welcomed and applauded when I did similar things.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
So, so you're like a full-time poet and playwright as a job, and I think many people might, especially young people, might not like sort of see poetry and being a poet as a career path. What would your suggestions be for someone who wants to become or might think they want to become a poet as a career and a full-time job?
Um, it's hard. It is difficult. And it took maybe 10 years of hustling and doing various other things before I came to write full time. But even then, it's still difficult to only do this. So I do five things in total for a living. Writing is just at the forefront, but I also curate events. I also work as a graphic designer. I run a project called the Midnight Run, where I create essentially arts-led walking tours through cities. I write poetry and I write theater, and I've just begun to branch into screenplays. I run an event called Poetry Film Hack, where I commission poets to write poems about film, and I'm just about to start an event called Real Mix, where I commission script writers to write very, very short film scripts, which are then made into short films. So I guess what I'm trying to say is always have other things on your plate, other concerns, other side hustles, if you will, and don't commit to solely being a writer. And if you want to do so, take years of just hard labor before that becomes all that you do. But also, I think even if it becomes all that you do, it's gonna get very unnecessarily anxiety inducing and high pressured, and you find that you get bored with solely writing. If we look at some of the greatest writers, they all always had other things, other side hustles. They were either librarians or lecturers or sports coaches, etc. And this meant that there were other stimuli, other ways in which the world was speaking to them as human beings, which they channeled into their work. So look for other things to do alongside your writing is what I'm trying to say. and don't let this be the sole creative output. Try and find other things to do to feed into your work and enrich your work. But yeah, solely don't do this. Please, for your sanity, this is my advice. Don't only be a writer.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you very much. Now, being like, when you became a poet, who or what would you say was your biggest inspiration to sort of get into this line of work? Like, what inspired you to do it?
There were quite a few. Well, firstly, I started writing because I didn't have a choice. When I started working, it was illegal for me to do anything else because of my immigration status. So I wrote because it was the only thing I could do. I couldn't go to university. I couldn't get a job. I had time on my hands, words in my head, and a sense of aesthetics, and that guided me. But other poets who became sort of like my spiritual forefathers and foremothers include poets like Saul Williams, Malika Booker, Me Ayikwe Park, Jacob Summer Rose, John Keats, William Shakespeare, Elizabeth Bishop, Ivan Boland, Jessica Care Moore. Yeah, and I read their works looking for things that spoke to me, things that I understood on a spiritual level, on an emotional level, on a sort of logical level, and trying to understand and to meditate over that enriched my understanding of literature and the powers of literature. Um, yeah, so those are my driving forces at the time, my batteries, my inspirations. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so many others.
Yeah, thank you. That was very
So
interesting.
we have another question from the audience. How do you balance the authenticity of voice whilst also considering form and structure? And do you have any advice for an aspiring dyslexic writer who wants to be authentic whilst also improving form and structure?
Um, Stay weird is my most important advice, which is try and understand the things that make you you. The weird obsessions you have with 80s comic book characters, with 90s pop songs, and just drill into that constantly. Root yourself in your weird obsessions. And when you begin to write in forms, write from those obsessions, or funnel those obsessions into those forms. And in doing so, that over and over again, you root yourself in who you are. And then subconsciously, it will take over you, and you won't be trying to protect your voice. It will just be your voice. Um, so, for instance, a lot of my work centers on identity, displacement, and destiny, and all of that is rooted in being an immigrant. And I wasn't aware of this until a friend of mine pointed it out. And my last play was called Three Sisters, which is an adaptation of the play by Chekhov. And it took me a while to understand that the reason why I was drawn to the play is because those three sisters are going through everything that I've gone through. They're also under a prism and under the pressure, and the identity is under threat because they were Nigerians stuck in a civil war where they were forced to leave one country and go into another that was invented overnight. So identity was in flux. Destiny, everything was beyond them. Their lives, their agency, their jobs, nutrition, food, governments were killing millions of people, and they were just stuck in the middle. And identity, destiny, and displacement was all around them because there were over 3 million internally displaced Nigerians walking, traveling through, and coming to this small provincial town in which they lived. So all of these three things that were the core of my identity as a writer were played out across these three women, and I had no clue. It took me maybe 7 drafts into the play before I understood that. And I think this is how voice and works. So just to really understand and deepen everything that you're drawn to, the books that you like to read, the TV shows and films, and just always write from this perspective and funnel that into forms. And the more you do so, the more the more instinctive it is, and then your voice will shine out. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So, do you think that growing up in different places with different cultures affects your view of the world?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I left when I was 12 years old, when I was just about to become a teenager. Then I came to London. Then when I turned 15, I moved to Ireland. So another pivotal halfway through my teens. Then when I turned 18, when I was just about to become an adult, I moved and came back here. So every step of the way, I lost people and I lost worlds that I loved, that I'd given myself to. And in order to fit into all of those communities, I had to understand and take in a lot of the world, but also make myself as open to that world as well, which meant that I had to understand and cut through everything from language barriers to traditions, etc., just to understand who people were and why they ticked. And that understanding really helps me as a reader and as a writer. So yeah, I think so. It's really at the core of my practice as a writer, but also how I understand the ways in which the world works, and also how I misunderstand in ways I think the world works.
Yeah, thank you. That was very interesting.
Thank you.
And so our final question, ending on a positive note, is what is something positive that you have taken out of 2020?
Um, that the world will always be here, and it's okay to turn down projects and to say no, and that something else will come along, and we'll find a way to survive. We have done so, and we always will. And also, humanity is really, we've been lucky. This virus could have been fundamentally worse. If we look at things like Ebola, which was also coronavirus, they had a 30% mortality rate, um, and it was vastly more infectious. Ours was a 3% mortality rate. If it wasn't a little bit more than that, millions more people would have died. And and again, humanity, we're lucky. We have to understand this could have been phenomenally worse. So that is what I take from this, and we've been given another chance to get our house in order before the next coronavirus hits. And yeah, we just have to see that and do the work right now to create a safer, better, more egalitarian world. And this is our opportunity right now. We have to harness it. Yeah, we've been lucky. That's my positive from the last year.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for joining us today. It's been really interesting to talk to you, and for writing the post for us. So, big virtual round of applause for Inua audience members. If you didn't catch the poem earlier, I definitely recommend rewinding this stream and checking it out. It looks back over the eventful year in 2020, but in a truly unique and different way. You can also check out our earlier panel by heading to the National Centre of Writing YouTube page. Thank you for your questions, audience, and thank you to India for your time. It was
Thanks for
very
having me.
interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Have a
much.
good day.
Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.